Support for this program is provided by the men and women of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Through sustainable forestry, LFA members promote the health and productivity of Louisiana's forests for generations to come.
Good evening and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney.
And I'm Craig Freeman. Our discussion focuses on Louisiana's biannual legislative fiscal session. Budget deficits for the upcoming fiscal year, which begins July 1st, were projected for 46 states, including Louisiana. The struggle to equalize the state's income with expenses has been going on in Baton Rouge for the past 59 days. The session ends Thursday, June 25th.
Well, when a deficit looms, lawmakers usually have three options. They can cut spending, which can mean fewer services, raise taxes, which can anger constituents, or they can combine reduced spending with increased taxation. Most legislators have avoided the T word. Instead, they hope to reduce the size of spending cuts by using some of the state's rainy day fund and revenue from a proposed tax amnesty plan. With the session winding down, the search for dollars continues. Struck by the nation's economic downturn, Louisiana, like virtually every other state, is seeing a drop in revenue. Lower oil prices and declining sales and corporate tax collections have left the state's general fund with a $1.3 billion shortfall. At the opening of the regular session in April, Governor Jindal indicated the challenge this poses for legislators.
We're going to have to work hard together to do more with less.
Since 2009 is an odd-numbered year, the focus of the session has primarily been fiscal, with most of the attention going to the governor's proposed $26.7 billion budget. While the budget offsets some of the state's revenue gap with federal stimulus money, higher education and health care still face major cuts. As the legislature struggles to balance the budget as required by law, each chamber is taking a decidedly different approach.
It is an old-fashioned game of chicken.
Bill Barrow is a Capitol reporter for the New Orleans Times-Picayune. He notes that while the House has fairly closely followed the governor's recommendations, the Senate has shown more independence.
Contrary to the Louisiana tradition of the governor kind of moving all the pieces around the chessboard, the Senate has drawn a line and said, no, we're not going to go that way.
While the House is focused primarily on spending cuts, the Senate has pushed for revenue-raising measures to restore funding to higher ed and health care. Despite overwhelming opposition to the Senate's version of the budget, the House bypassed the opportunity for a compromise by punting it to the governor after only 1 hour of debate.
What that did, though, is it left a lot of funding mechanisms that the Senate put in dire jeopardy because the House had no intention of passing some of those things.
Barry Irwin is president of the Council for a Better Louisiana. Irwin says the House's action and the governor's veto of the Senate's plans put the legislature back to square one.
So the challenge now is, okay, here we are in the final days trying to figure out how we're going to do all of these things. How can we go and restore cuts to some of these things that we all say are important? What kind of mechanisms, what kinds of legislation are there still out there to try and actually do that?
Ideas currently on the table include delaying a scheduled personal income tax break until 2012. The Senate's proposed deduction delay would affect nearly 25% of Louisiana's filers, while freeing up $118 million for higher education. The House considers the move unconstitutional. Using money from payments made by citizens to a proposed tax amnesty program. This idea is being promoted by the House, but has been a hard sell in the Senate. Tapping into the state's $775 million emergency rainy day fund. The House has agreed to use $86 million. The Senate wants to pull 3 times as much. Governor Jindal's concern is that there will be enough money available in the account 2 years from now when federal stimulus dollars disappear.
What the public needs to remember is that we have federal one-time dollars of about $950 million in each of the next 2 years. But in the third year, we lose that, and at that point we face this problem on our own.
Republican Jim Tucker is Speaker of the House. He feels that the House has made good progress this session in preparing for the impending shortfalls, including improving state government's efficiencies.
I think the most important bill for the long-term health of the state is the bill that I have that creates a commission to study higher education in the interim. And next year, I think the session is going to be all about restructuring higher education.
While the legislature's working relationship has been strained, the governor scored early triumphs this session with the approval of nearly $50 million to reopen a Farmerville chicken processing plant and $85 million to accommodate the New Orleans Saints. But Jindal's victories were somewhat overshadowed by the public appeal of 4 former governors to reduce his proposed cuts to higher education. Journalist Barrow.
It's never a good thing when 4 of your predecessors come back and certainly implicitly question your judgment and the way you're doing your job.
The governor gave the legislature a green light to ease the 15% cut to higher ed. The House claims it will be able to reduce that amount to nearly 10%, the amount that the Board of Regents says it can handle. Health care faces cuts of $413 million. An increase in the tax on cigarettes that would have been used to reduce these cuts ultimately failed in the House. The Senate is currently working to restore $35 million in health care funding, which will attract an even greater amount in federal matching funds. In non-fiscal matters, a proposal to address the state's school dropout problem received a lot of attention this session.
Close to 50% of our kids not being able to graduate high school is data enough for me, and I think for all of you.
Republican Senator Bob Kostelka's legislation will ease standards for certain 8th graders to pass on to the 9th grade. While Governor Jindal supports the measure, education advocates are concerned that it will limit options for students choosing the easier track. By the time this session ends, Irwin hopes its greatest success will be peace of mind for what lies ahead.
I think the biggest accomplishment of this session, if we get one, is going to be that we're able to go home when this is all over with, knowing that we're going to have severe cuts, but hoping that they're going to be ones that we can live with and that we can manage through over a period of a couple of more years, because we know the revenue picture is still not going to be good, at least for the very short foreseeable future.
We'll see how well our studio audience can live with the legislature's decisions in a moment. Our audience includes those who are randomly recruited and surveyed by LSU's Public Policy Research Lab, plus several members of the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. When asked about balancing the budget, 2 out of 3, 67%, said adequate funding for higher education and health care was a higher priority than cutting spending. 18% said cutting spending was their priority, 15% weren't sure. When asked about delaying tax deductions to help balance the budget, 37% supported that idea. 45% opposed it, 18% weren't sure. How well has Governor Jindal handled the state budget? Only 35% approve his performance. 40% disapprove, and 25% aren't sure. Those numbers look good compared to how well respondents think the legislators are doing. Just over 1 in 8, 13%, approve of the way the legislature is handling the budget. 42% disapprove, but a whopping 43% are withholding judgment. So let's start there. Don't withhold your judgment any longer. How has the legislature performed so far this session? Susan, have they done a good job?
Well, my concern is, this session started way back in April, and yet here we are, down to the wire. 2 of our participants couldn't make it tonight because they're back in battles, and we've faced this every year since I was a kid. I mean, I can tell you that the legislature is in this position. I'm a project manager. Can somebody tell me why they take every Friday off and then get themselves in this position at the end of the session every year?
Is it a time management issue? Is it a budget issue, Dave?
I do believe it has a lot to do with time management, but sometimes I really don't understand why it is this way, but I really don't think they tend to think too far ahead in terms of what really needs to be done. I don't think they really give full range of thought to their decisions and how it impacts each other. Like Susan said, this session has been going on for months. For most of us at our jobs, if we were given a project to do and we start in April and need to be turned in by June, I seriously doubt if most of us would be in good shape if we thought we were coming down to the wire with 3 days left and we still were locked in battles with our project members, still trying to get things done. That's not the way you manage a project. And the government should be run just like any other business or organization or group. It really should work the same way. And I've been working up there as a page, and I've seen it does not work the same way, if we can even determine that it really works efficiently whatsoever.
Beverly, you're nodding your head. You agree?
I agree with him wholeheartedly. I also believe that Part of the problem is that our legislators come to the Capitol and they become individuals instead of elected officials. If they were truly elected officials, they would also have constituent groups working on these issues while they're in session. I guarantee you they would have some solutions if they had their constituent partners working in their communities while they're at the Capitol.
George, it can't be all bad, though, or is it?
Well, if you look at the Bible, and I know everybody thinks I'm the one going to bring it up, but if you look at the Bible, it says you can tell a false prophet by his fruits. Let's look at the fruits of the legislature. I think the crop's still out. They ain't coming in. So I don't know.
So nothing, not a positive moment in this legislative session? I mean, we talked about motorcycle helmets or sexual offenders. None of those things make you happy, Brenda?
Well, what I saw today when I was watching, I'm not sure if it was a rerun, but Representative Pearson was there at the podium, and everybody that spoke to her was asking questions. Are you aware of what happened in 1961 when President Kennedy, I'm not sure exactly what it was about. I know the embargo was in 62. I was in high school, but there was nothing, there was no result. There was no end result. Nothing was accomplished. They were just shooting questions at her. Are you aware of this? Are you aware of that? Well, if you're spending my tax dollars, get busy, do something. And I want to also talk about the health care. I'm very concerned with the economic impact that the Medicaid cuts going to have on the local hospitals here. Not to mention my job, and I'm a Medicaid billing specialist for a local facility here, not to mention the influx of patients coming from River West since they closed that hospital. So I'm looking for some action, and I'm looking for it right away. My job is at risk.
And then is it, we have some concerns with health care, we have some concerns with jobs. Is there anything that we can do or that the legislature can do to resolve this? Catherine?
I think there's solutions out there, and I think that Governor Jindal is doing the best that he can to find the best solution for the complicated issues that are at hand. It's not going to be an easy fix because our economy is in a serious situation.
Do you feel that the governor and the legislature work together, or that they are not working towards the same goal? Catherine?
I think right now there's a lot of contention between the legislature and the governor's office from what I'm seeing.
Who do you trust?
That's hard to know, isn't it?
Is there one that, can we get to a place where we can trust them both, or do they have to war? Do they have to be opposed to each other? Michael?
I think it's very juvenile, personally, and this is coming from a juvenile, but at the same time, I think that if you're going to argue like that in a professional position, you shouldn't be in that position. You should be focused on the issues. This is a fiscal session. Why aren't we focused on fiscal issues?
Melinda, is there any one particular issue that you wish they would resolve without having to take 60 days to argue at the last minute? Is there anything they should have resolved?
Well, Bobby, he's doing a great job. He's doing a great job. It's just that, he putting the money in the wrong places. Like the chicken farm he having to open up in New Orleans. Is that money going to come to Baton Rouge to give more jobs? Like $50 million. I think that's a lot of money. And, he should, is it all right to help Baton Rouge, or is it going to stay in New Orleans?
And I think that's one of the questions is, it seems like the governor's got a priority for economic development. What are your priorities, Robert? What should be number one on the state's list?
Well, in my opinion, taking care of higher education ought to be number one.
Okay. Anybody else? Scott?
I'm a professor at LSU. So.
Okay. So higher ed.
Anybody
else? I knew, Brenda, you talked a little bit about health care. Al, what do you think?
And for one thing, you got to create jobs. If you ain't got a job, how can you pay for anything? Simple as that. The key issue is to get the people working. That's the only way you're going to bring your economy up.
Okay, so we've got to do...
Yeah, you got to do what's required. If you got people not working, look at what Brenda said. Her job is at stake. Okay. And how long she's been working. My job was just taken from me a month ago. A month ago because of the economy. Right. Layoffs, but thank God you keep a nest egg. Better sure y'all have a nest egg, because you never know what's about to occur here. Now, the way things
spend our
nest egg. Exactly.
Katie, it's your nest egg that we may be spending. What are your priorities?
I think definitely education at a young age. I mean, we're talking about jobs, but it's important that kids stay literate and, they're reading these books. Maybe they can create these new industries. We have to keep them thinking. That's really important. Also, I think effective policy making is important. I mean, that affects all of these different issues. I mean, I think that accountability and ethics in our policy making, especially the legislature, is super important in all the decisions we're going to make in the future. So as long as we keep on doing the research and keeping people accountable, I think that we can start to make some really smart decisions.
Robert, are you worried about the next 2 or 3 years? We've got some things in place, some accountability. What are you worried about moving forward?
Politicians in Louisiana, and as well as a lot of states, they're not in touch with the constituents. I feel that they were elected by the people. Now it's time to work for the people, as opposed to what they're doing now. They're making decisions without getting, okay, what does the state think? How do we feel about this, or how do we feel about that?
Do we need to get rid of them? Do we need to elect new people?
We need to have them stand on their campaign promises. When I see all of the poster boards and everybody's names and pictures, and we're going to do this and we're going to do it. Now is the time to do it. And you know what? I'm glad for a forum like this, because I've been waiting to voice my opinion on on young adults. I'm talking 13 through 15 years old. We have a really, really rough crime rate in every part of the city. I don't need to select any one particular. But when you look at 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old young men that does not have summer jobs, that is not in the volunteer system. I got my son in the volunteer system at 13, 14, and 15, and he had volunteered for a job on his 16th birthday, got it, and is still working. So we need to find a way to, this is probably national, but I'm looking at changing the labor laws so that these 13, 14, and 15-year-olds, especially 14 and 15, these are big boys, and they want things that they really should earn rather than have their parent dish out iPads, phones, PlayStations.
But no, I thought the legislature did that one. That's one I thought that the legislature helped with. They have this new program now. A different diploma. 8th graders can take a different standard or a different test. Michael or Dave.
I don't see it happening.
Well, I understand that whole issue coming up where they're trying to give them a separate alternative route to education.
We're trying to help students with 50% dropout.
Which I believe that there are pros and cons to a program such as that, just like it stated before. While it does give them an alternate way to go about achieving success, at the same time, there are always going to be those who we're just going to overlook. And the question is this program going to uplift a large number of those? Because if it's not, if it's merely going to give alternate paths, I'm not so sure if it'll be such a great idea as much as it should be. Because if we could figure out a way to make it work for those who, because there are always going to be those people who are merely being overlooked, because that's just the way life is, the way things work, But if we can figure out a way to really pull them up into it, I think it would be a really good program. But if they get left out, then I'm not so sure if it's going to outweigh the cons, which would be lowering standards of education in our state.
Michael, and I know Greg, George, you also, Greg, I'm sorry, you also had a question. Greg.
I didn't really have a question. I agree with what most of the panel has said up until this point. I think, unfortunately, the government was created with a balance of power so that no single dictator could take over the situation or the state or the country. And so it's kind of like watching sausage being made. It's not real pretty, but unfortunately it's the system we have, and so in some sense it kind of protects us, and we have to kind of go along with the system and be patient with it, try to elect the representatives that we can and see what they can do for us.
So you have some confidence in the system?
Sure.
Michael?
Going back to education, it doesn't make sense that we're trying to lower our standards. Instead, we should be providing incentives for these kids to stay in high school. I mean, lowering standards it's going to make it easier. We're going to graduate more students, possibly. But what about the students who are dropping out of high school to pay for their family? They're working part-time jobs, they're working full-time jobs, and they don't have their high school degree. If we provide an incentive for them to get that high school degree, not only are we increasing our graduation rate, but we're also giving our state the ability to have more educated people filling our jobs, and we're allowing them to be able to pay for their families better. Think about it. I mean, you're putting a higher educated person in that job position, they're probably going to get paid more.
So you're saying nice try, but they kind of missed the mark here?
I love the bill.
You love the
I
bill?
love the bill.
Okay.
I have tutored over 600 students on the graduation exit exam to help those kids pass the test. I've worked on dropout prevention collaboratives. And finally, the legislators have provided a choice option for families. And how providing a choice is watering down standards, I have a hard time appreciating. But basically what it says is that in addition to the traditional diploma route, a student also has a career route. So if a child wants to test that route in collaboration with their parent, because they have to agree through the 5-year plan that this is what they want to do, they have an opportunity to get certifications in IT skills, SCE mechanic certifications, where they can walk out the door with a certificate and start making $25,000 to $35,000 a year as opposed to minimum wage. What's not to get excited about? Not to mention, a kid has an opportunity to choose subjects that they like.
Susan?
Yeah, I think the alternative certification, I gotta tell you, I graduated from high school, went on to LSU, and I didn't do so well in trigonometry my junior and senior high school. I can tell you I've never once used trigonometry in my professional life. So why we force these kids into this mold where it's like, you've got to take this class, you've got to learn this skill that they're never going to use when they can actually be learning something they're going to use. And to answer your concern, the trade programs, a lot of them do have financial assistance with them. So you're actually learning a trade and getting paid for that trade. So it's better than them quitting school and taking a job.
Right.
They're learning a skill, getting money, still supporting their families, and yet they have the equivalent of a high school diploma.
As long as they're getting funded, that's
they
okay.
are, yeah, absolutely.
Robert, I know you had your Scott.
With the closing of Lehigh, a lot of kids who will be returning to school for the next school year will have to go to a different school, learn the new teachers, new environment, and at the same time they would have put more kids into possibly an already crowded classroom or a whole school period. My thing is, what kind of programs are the state looking into to provide for like an after-school tutoring program for the whole parish to help with the failing grades in class?
We're going to have some people to help. And so when we return, we'll be joined by a panel of experts to further discuss the 2009 legislative session. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. We're discussing the 2009 legislative session. Joining us now is our panel of experts. Republican State Representative Joseph Kevin Pearson lives in Slidell and represents House District 76. Among his committee assignments are appropriations and the Joint Legislative Committee on the Budget. Mark Ballard has been the editor in charge of the Advocate's Capitol News Bureau since 2007. Mr. Ballard has received a National Investigative Reporters and Editors Award and a National Headliner Award. Kirby Goidel is a professor of mass communication and political science at LSU and director of the Public Policy Research Lab. His research interests include political participation, public opinion, and the media and politics. Senator Lydia Jackson and Representative Karen Carter Peterson were scheduled to appear, but were called into an emergency budget meeting. Let's go to our participants for their questions, and I think, Al, you had one to start us off.
Yes. I've been trying to figure out why the governor won't accept this money that they're trying. I mean, I'm pretty sure we need money, right? Huh? Would y'all agree?
Yes.
All right. Well, why won't he accept it?
It's this part that he wouldn't accept. Why?
What is it?
All three or any three. Kirby, you want to start us off?
Well, I think the reason he's given is that the money comes with strings attached, and the strings will ultimately increase taxes on businesses. Now, there have been some analyses that suggest that the law can be changed later to avoid that, but that's the rationale that he's given.
Oh, okay. In all actuality, you're saying he want to take it because they're going to make the businesses pay more taxes?
Yeah, in the future.
Representative.
Okay. It's a tough situation. We don't believe that there are ways that we can take it, in other words, and not stop taxing the corporations in the future. It is something that they will pay. One thing that we've done, and I think successfully so, is we've worked on economic development we're just beginning to see the fruits of the labor as our economy in the state. I mean, we've avoided some of the issues that other states have by trying to bring businesses to Louisiana. Tell businesses, we're not going to tax you like others. Come to us. It's a new day, a new Louisiana, and we are trying to do that. And this is one of those statements that just says, we're not going to tax you additionally for this.
Okay. But there's a question as to whether it actually would raise the taxes. The changes that they're making are very technical in the basis, and if there was going to be any increase in taxes, it would be 3 years down the road, if that's correct, when the stimulus money ran out, and if unemployment also rose as well. A lot of what is going on, I think the governor is following what has been a national Republican position to avoid to reject the stimulus for unemployment benefits.
So we don't know for sure if the businesses will be taxed in the future, but we're not willing to take money to help the disabled, to help higher education, and to help our healthcare system. But we're not sure that this money will cause taxing on the corporate businesses.
Well, I was going to say, in other words, this particular money that we're in discussion here,
Right.
in other words, all the other federal stimulus money, yes, the state is taking and putting to use towards higher education and every other area. This specific pool of money is money for unemployment compensation, for not current, it's for new future unemployment benefits, and some of the issues that go along with the Republican position, or however it is. I do believe there are going to be tax consequences upon corporations if we do take that, and it may be debatable, but the other issue is where we look at in that enabling legislation where someone is able to go to work for 3 weeks and then all of a sudden they're off on the unemployment getting benefits, and ultimately the companies are going to have to pay more into those benefits.
But wouldn't the people getting unemployment benefits allow them to spend money at retailers and other industries in the state that would actually increase the tax revenue for the state on the back end?
It could.
Is there any logic to that?
It could be argued. In other words, you could also argue the point that it is going to come from businesses. In other words, the same businesses, we're taking an approach that we're trying to be the most business-friendly state, and we have seen, we saw a new automobile manufacturer in Louisiana that is coming. The chicken processing plant, that was a different issue where we saw as a state, where if we don't try to keep this business and find a way that an economic model where it can work, that in itself, just losing that business was going to cost the state $25 million in unemployment benefits, so the investment was worth that. In answer to the question, I don't know if we can make the argument, well, if we tax companies, if we tax individuals and give the money to people, that money will be used in the economy. And it's a tough question, a tough answer. We want to create jobs that can provide benefits for health care, so we have less dependence on Medicaid, so we have less dependence on the hospital, so they have less people who go to work, who go there and have no insurance at all.
Yeah, but I'm at a loss. I'm still at a loss. I'm not following the logic.
Sure.
We have one of the most healthiest unemployment tax funds in the nation. Mm-hmm. So what's the deal? Wouldn't you all have to take some action in order for us to tax the businesses additionally? It's not automatic.
Well, there are a couple of issues at stake here. One is, one of the reasons for not accepting the stimulus money was clearly a political calculation in terms of the economic. Part of it was the economic stimulus money and a decision about national visibility and the timing of the stimulus package and the timing of Governor Jindal's response to the Obama speech. Part of that was a calculation in there. Part of it, though, was also a difference in opinion about the use of federal dollars and how it should be used, and also the implications. You did have to change the law, which would result, if the law was not changed back, in higher taxes on businesses. What's at debate is whether the state could then change the law again so that those businesses did not get taxed, and that seemed like that was a possibility.
And given the healthy fund we have, it would make sense.
Why wouldn't we just write the law to say this is in effect until X date and then it stops? I mean, that way you pretty much...
We never did anything like that before, did we?
No. I mean, the federal government does it all the time. The taxes, the incentives for green building expired in 2006. They were renewed in 2008. I mean, why can't we do that as a state?
There is argument that it would not be allowed. That what President Obama is trying to do is to widen the pool of people who can accept unemployment to more mirror the way people are working these days. Because many retailers, for instance, are seasonal workers, and they don't get unemployment. And he's trying to change who gets it, change the mechanisms of it. But we do have a healthy unemployment fund.
So I'm thinking, what did the calculations come back with the extended pool? Would Louisiana still have a substantial fund? Would we have been able to take care of it just as we are?
Well,
did anyone do the analysis?
I think that's where the argument is.
Well, it's funny, when they did a similar extension in 2001, it wasn't left up to the states. The federal government just said unemployment benefits are extended. I think it's interesting that they've left it up to the states this time, and that certain states are saying, well, if you live in Louisiana, that's not an option for you, but if you live in New Jersey, that's an option for you. That to me doesn't make any sense.
And Scott, I knew you also had a question kind of on a different topic.
Let's go in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Slightly different.
So let me just say where I'm coming from. I work at LSU in the math department, and we pride ourselves on running a lean ship. In other words, if you look at how many staff members we have for all 150 graduate students and professors that work in the math department, we have 7. And whereas other flagship universities all around the country, if you go and you look, they're all double or even triple that number. So when you go to say that we have to cut, now we're looking at cutting off of something that we really have no place to cut. Representative Pearson, can you explain or just go through what are some of the things that you're trying to do in the legislative?
Sure. And let me just say that 2 years ago, I was a regular citizen just like all of you, and really I wish and started to take an interest, I think, as you have, and I think this is a great forum. But getting to your question, working in the Appropriations Committee, in other words, the session started a couple months ago. We started a month or two before that having regular meetings in the Appropriations Committee. And we had every department of the state, every department, the colleges, higher education, everyone. We have a reality that, yes, we are getting those stimulus funds this year, coming fiscal year, and the next year. That's going to be okay. Now, we have some cuts that we have to make there because there's simply less revenue. But we do see in 3 years where we're going to have considerably less revenue, and that is because of federal dollars, Medicaid matching funds, and we see like a $1.9, I believe, billion reduction in revenues, trying to figure out how we're going to get there. And we try to be frugal, those of us that really, really want to try and make a difference. And I understand what you're
really
saying.
Proud of the fact
absolutely.
That we
and we recognize the need of the LSU flagship, but we also have to recognize in the state where we have the 14 four-year colleges. I think all of us have recognized that we have to deal with that somehow and say that we cannot continue to fund 14 four-year universities in the state.
Kevin, which ones do you recommend we shut down?
Well, that's probably why I'm at least still here alive, breathing, because I haven't said yet. But I don't know the answer to that question. And
do you think we'll have an answer in 2 years?
There's one resolution by Speaker Jim Tucker that we're passing, and it seems
that we're
as though
going to do
everyone
a
is in
study.
support. We've done some studies before. I think there's certainly a new body. I hope there's a new body, a new will, I think, in the House. You know, we want some direction, guidance from that. I think we know that LSU is the flagship, the premier university in the state of Louisiana. There's no question about that. We also see problems in funding it and getting, how do we deal with the cuts?
Well,
It's such a long thing, and I would love to sit down, and we really need to spend a lot of time on that. Where do we go? The President Constitution of Louisiana gives us X number of dollars. A certain amount is what is left over that we have for higher education and for health care.
It seems like we're band-aiding the problem.
And actually, maybe I can get the help from
Please, yes.
guest here. Why is it that we always have to look for healthcare and higher education? Constitutionally, we always get stuck with this little part.
Why are gaming funds protected by law? Those funds can't be tapped because they're protected by law. Why isn't higher education and healthcare protected by law? That the people that are hurting the most are going to get the gaming funds.
Right now, there's a good deal of the budget is protected. It's called dedicated funding, and 13%, I believe, is protected by constitutional amendment.
For health care and education?
And
no,
for everybody. And then the
else.
dedications, I think it's up there, you might be right, it's in about 80%, 85% of the rest of the money, leaving only health care and education. This came about because taxpayers, you and I, at some point were saying, or years ago, we're saying they raise taxes on us, and they say they're going to use it, gambling being a good example, to go into to education, and then they divert it off into something else. And we're saying, well, if I'm going to vote for this tax, I want to have it dedicated. I want to know that it's going there. And it has caused
aren't the gaming funds supposed to go to education?
They do. I'd say that they do.
A portion, like one.
But you know what has happened in the past? In other words, you'll dedicate the funds to that, and then the other funds that you're using out of the budget, state fund, general fund, or whatever, would be taken out and go to another area. Now, I've seen that in the past. I don't think we're seeing, well, you always have to work with what you have left over to fund those items that need to be funded.
It seems to me that you're saying that suddenly the legislature, which has not had the political will to deal with this issue, only 13% of the budget, as Mark indicated, is dedicated by Constitution. So the legislature lacks the political will to unscramble these scrambled eggs. And yet we're going to come back in a year or two and we're going to start shutting down state universities. Am I the only person in this room that is skeptical that the legislature is suddenly going to develop that backbone?
Kirby, I mean, you also do some public polling. I mean, is Robert alone? I mean, do people trust the legislature to make these cuts without, some constitutional mandates?
People definitely don't trust the legislature. We know that people don't trust legislatures in general, legislative bodies, and the comment earlier about making sausage was appropriate, because part of the problem is so much of what legislatures do is public, and people don't really like to see democracy in action. We like the idea of democracy, but we don't like to see it in action. One of the issues that I think comes up is the problem isn't just that higher ed and healthcare aren't protected. The problem is that other areas are protected. And the problem is that they're protected because of political processes that have led to them being protected over time because of a lack of trust. And so we limit some of our flexibility in the future. Another problem is that we have so many institutions. We have so many four-year institutions. We all know that we need to move from four-year institutions to more two-year community colleges and to have a more efficient and more effective higher education system, but there's nowhere in the process where we say, oh, we're going to really prioritize LSU Baton Rouge and we're going to make some of these really tough decisions about these other campuses. Nobody wants to do that politically.
But you pointed out the commission that he is talking about is going to provide a political cover for the legislatures. They're going to come out and say, we need to shut these down, and then they'll be able to say, oh, I'm voting because of the commission.
But really, will it do that? Because I think so many legislative decisions are made because they're worried about what the 30-second soundbite is going to sound like in their next campaign. And when they don't really want to take the time to say, this is a little bit more complicated of an issue, and I'm going to explain it to my constituents, and I'm going to sit down and work through it with them, rather than saying, we're against all taxes, even though this tax is going to keep youth from smoking cigarettes, I'm going to be the anti-tax, governor. And he came out before the legislative session and said that. That doesn't make any sense to me. That sounds great in a soundbite, and it sounds like, oh, I was against all taxes. Well, but it's not, logically based.
Is that what we've got as a legislator, as a legislature and with the governor? Are we worried more about sound bites than about governing, or are we getting a balance of both, and then all three?
I hope not. And we have bills. We're talking about the dedicated funds. We have bills that are passing now, Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2. These are bills that say, okay, the governor can, through the legislature, can take rather than 5% out of these dedicated funds and change it to 10%, so we can address the issues, the shortfalls that we have.
Has he taken the 5% out of the dedicated funds?
No, he has not.
What are the cuts again?
Well, the reason is because you have the 5%, but it's limited to 5% over 2 years. So he's got this year to deal with, and we have this year to deal with, and we have next year to deal with. So if he took all of 5% this year and not knowing what would happen next year, we wouldn't have any avenue to
Why
go
are we
to.
only creating a budget for 1 year? Because it seems like we're creating a lot of speculation within that year, and then each year, each year after that, we create deficits and we create a lack of money that we can't afford. We're dedicating to the wrong
As a
places.
state, though, technically, the state cannot run a deficit. We have to balance the budget each year, another constitutional issue. So I think we do look forward. If we didn't look forward in budgeting, we would not be recognizing. We have revenue fiscal estimating committees that are looking at what the budgets are going to be, how much money we're going to have in revenues over the next number of years. Just from my short experience in the legislature, I've seen it's like if you have the money, they will spend it. There's not so much will to put something aside for the next year. They will always find something that needs to be funded.
But in making cuts towards higher education and healthcare, it seems like we're taking the life force from Louisiana. It's healthcare, obviously, but you're taking the two of the most important things, and you're cutting funds from those, and you're just kind of leaving these other funds in there. Why haven't we started some initiative to have like a revamped constitution, to where we can just start from zero again and try to fix those issues?
I'd say there is a directive towards that, and I think there is a resolution that we are trying to pass, and there's a group that are talking about a new constitutional convention that we can have. One thing I want to talk about in higher education, again, the cuts, and I hear it about as cuts and cuts, and we understand, and I'm deeply concerned, but we are working, and that's why we talked about, I think now we have a resolution where we will tap the rainy day fund. It's raining. We understand that. I know that. I understand that. We also have to acknowledge that higher education has grown over the last 10 years, and I believe the budget has doubled in the last 10 years for higher education. Now, certainly there's inflation and factors such as that, but we have our higher education spending has grown. Now, certainly we've got to back off of it, but it has grown in the last 10 years. I believe we've been probably number one in the South in accelerated growth in spending on higher education.
And Mark or Kirby, are we different from other states? And Mark, have you heard?
Yeah, a large part of that big growth, though, however, was to bring LSU, to bring the universities up to the regional levels. And
I go back to health care. What's the legislative timeline on Medicaid cuts? Because I'd like to know about the viability, the economic impact it's going to have on the local hospitals. We had a hospital close in Plaquemine. We're getting that influx into our hospitals here. Speak to me on the timeline. What are you all doing right now about Medicaid cuts?
We've talked to the hospitals that, yesterday they were there at the Capitol. Okay. Certainly talking to us, and we do, there are people there every day that we're discussing these issues with. Heads of hospitals, just ordinary people from the hospitals working there and telling about the issues. We've had meetings. We'll discuss these with them.
Any resolution?
Yes, I think, in other words, we're trying to find an acceptable, tolerable level.
A median.
The bottom line is we don't have the money. That is one thing. We don't have it. And you can say fully fund us against the higher education that is going to say fund us.
Yes.
And it's not there. It is not there to do that. And not only that, do we not have it this year? We don't have it next year.
Do we
And
not
that's
have
including-
do we not have the possibility of meeting halfway?
We've already made strides towards that in the hospitals. We said, what area do you need us to fund? And in higher education, we talked to the Board of Regents about that. In other words, we were talking about $229 million in cuts because that's where the initial budget came out. And they said, restore half, and we can live with that. We can work with that. Working on performance-based modeling for the schools, which is something that you were talking about, trying to make the high-performing schools funded
exactly
better.
what I want to see.
That is something. We've not necessarily seen a plan from the Board of Regents yet, because that is who's taking the money to distribute it to the schools. That is something we expect to see more
That
from.
goes back.
And George, I know you also had a question.
Excuse me. That goes back to my original question. If we got all this money that's trying to be presented to us, and we need all this money right now, why worry about trying to tax somebody years later when we in dire need of this now? We want to cut college. We want to cut health care. I mean, I can't understand that.
We can't use that money for that. That is unemployment money for new unemployment benefits.
Okay,
for
so
new
if-
employee, that money cannot go to that. That cannot go to
But
health
your
care.
question is, it's a basic philosophical difference between, I guess, really members of the Senate and members of the House right now, where the House is, or the majority is saying, we need to cut, we need to make government smaller. And the Senate is saying, we need to find more revenues so that these cuts that we all know are coming are not going to be nearly as drastic. And I think people fall in with either one side or the other on that all across the state.
So what's the future for
George.
people on disability?
Uh,
I'm sorry,
George,
George, go.
I'm not sure I remember it. It goes back to the bottom line about priorities. I've heard all my life, and I'm probably not much older than any of you. Okay, I am. But the thing is, the youth of this state and the country is our future. And the elder, or people like me that are veterans and non-veterans that have worked all their life, is the backbone of this state. Then why aren't they number 1 and 2? Why are we not making places for that money, put them in priority? We are supposed to be, those kids are our top future. They're the ones that are going to make a difference. So saying we're going to give them higher education and not doing it isn't helping. We really need to put them number 1 and take care of the elderly and the new ones that need Medicare, Medicaid, all those. Those need to be a top 1 priority for everybody.
Well, there are 2 points. One is, one of the reasons is that it's difficult is you are making real choices. George Will likes to say the governing is to choose. And we are making real choices. So how many people in this room will pay more in taxes personally in order to fund higher education, in order to fund health care at a higher level, and so forth? So it's not, and what happens is, and from a public opinion perspective, and you all may be unique as an audience, a lot of people say, there's waste out there in government. You can get all the money you need. You just cut waste, and you don't have to cut any core services. But we're at a point where either people have to pay more in taxes, or we have to delay tax breaks, or we have to otherwise generate more revenue, or we have to make cuts that people are really going to feel.
But the problem is we don't know that money's going right to where we say. It's not really pointed at that. If you say, we're going to do this, but this money cannot be used for anything but education, you're going to get a lot of people back in it.
Well, that's what we do. We have we have our K through 12 education in that roughly 65% of our budget that is being allocated towards whatever the Constitution says is being allocated towards. Do I agree that everything in there is right? Not at all. But that 35% that we're talking about right now, the health care and the higher education, that's the 35% that we're able to cut. We're keeping some of our education in that 65%. We need to have all of it, I think.
You're gonna run
but
for politics, huh? No. Your point is good, but is that enough for the top 2 things this state and nation need?
Oh no.
Is it? Well, then that's the point.
But to piggyback on your priorities, we're looking at investments, and I think the car plant Monroe is a great thing to come to Louisiana, and I think the chicken plant is great that it saved all those jobs. But what happens when those kids graduate from LSU? I know 2 days after I graduated from LSU, I left the state because the kind of job that I wanted didn't exist here.
Right.
And to this day, it still doesn't exist. I work here, but 9 times out of 10, I get on an airplane and leave the state to go do what I do. So what are we doing to make the priority those high-paid, high-class, world-class jobs that we need those mathematicians at LSU to do?
Right.
We don't do that, and that's one of the biggest concerns. We invest in the
through
Saints.
education,
We're going to
get those
keep
people with
the
that
$1 million
training.
football players in New
David, too,
Orleans,
with a
but we're
question.
not going to have great world-class
I'm just
jobs.
listening to everyone, and everything goes off into different tangents. But I believe if I'm listening to it, you can really boil. I've discovered that with most things, you can really boil things down to a central point, and everything branches out, just like with a tree or with a spider. And I really think this is all coming back to an issue of trust and accountability between the people and the people who represent them in the legislature. And I believe even that comes down to accountability of the legislature itself and efficiency, because the legislature should run just like any other business or any organization, anything else where it's a large group of people that are supposed to be working together to accomplish a common goal. And my question is, obviously, the trust is not there. The accountability has not been established. That is what we're all talking about here. Because we don't trust the legislature, we have found them not to be accountable, not to be efficient. And I'm not zeroing in on our legislator here. I'm asking all three of you. What can possibly be done? Because I've actually spent the last couple of weeks some extensive time up at the Capitol, and I've been sitting in, and I've seen that there's a lot of not really the collaboration that I was hoping I would see between the top leaders and legislators of our state. And I just want to know what can possibly be done, or what should at least be try to be achieved to try and pull everyone back together and achieve the kind of accountability that we are looking for to establish the trust, so that things like this, you wouldn't even have to worry about having things held in. You could be able to use things for whatever, because we would trust you to do what is right.
Well, let's get Mark the fourth ring.
I was going to say, that would be seasoning.
Part of the problem, and I think the legislature does a good job at a lot of things. Their failure and the leadership's failure is to explain fully where they want to see this state to go. Where is the state going to be in 5 years? What kind of government services are we going to have? What kind of services should we be funding, and which ones should we have to punt? How many universities are we going to have? And I don't see that.
Now, can you ask that as the editor of the Advocate? How do we get that from?
I've asked that a lot, and I get all of these kind of we get a kumbaya type of answers here.
We expect our
And I'm sorry,
elected
Brenda, but
officials.
let me let Kirby and Kevin just get a chance to answer before we move on. Kevin and Kirby.
Well, I think one of the frustrating things, and part of your frustration and my frustration, and I think also in the legislature, the frustration as well, is what we end up doing is we end up responding to an immediate crisis or immediate budget situation without having that conversation about priorities. So what we are dealing with as a policy matter is really about who we are as a people and who we are as a state and what we value. But the reality is we're making the decision in a crunch time where the choices become that much more difficult. And to defend the legislature, and I think Mark hit on this point, one of the reasons it's so tough is because the issues and the choices are hard. And the differences between the Senate and the House are substantial, and they're philosophical and they're important. What I think is disappointing as well is not having that conversation about those philosophical differences and what it means for the future of the state in a way that voters can respond to and say, yeah, well, I agree with the Senate's position, or yes, I agree with the House's position.
There are bills, there are legislative bills, and maybe you saw it, that you would think take 10 minutes to deliberate, and we're sitting there on the floor for 2 hours because everyone is pushing a button, asking a question about something, as we say, motorcycle helmets. However, we all represent different constituencies. Every one of the 104, 105 supposed to be in the House and the 39 in the Senate represent a different segment of population, different group of people from all different areas of the state. And we clearly do and should have different viewpoints. Trying to bring them together and get them to work as one. I mean, certainly we have priorities for education and health care, but it's a process, and maybe we should have longer at it, maybe we should have shorter at it. I'm not sure which one.
But you have a process which 60 vote constantly the same way.
Yes.
And that seems to curtail a lot of the debate and the discussion, at least from what I've been hearing, and from many of your colleagues who are among the 35 to 37 who vote against the administration, saying we're not brought in, we're not part of it.
Well, we've got to end the debate today. I'm sorry. I know we've got more questions, but unfortunately we've run out of time. But I really want to thank all of our panelists today. Thank Mr. Ballard, Representative Pearson, and Professor Goidel for their time this afternoon. Thanks. When we come back, we'll have a few closing comments.
Well, interesting conversation, but we're in a difficult position because lots of things could change before the final moment of the session Thursday at 6.
Exactly. We've got to wait for the bell. You're not sure what's going to happen until the very end on this one, and so it's down to the wire.
Well, you know, I started covering the sessions in 1972, and pretty much they always go down to the wire, although I remember one time when they didn't pass a budget at all, right, and we had to come back again. And I don't think we're in that position now.
Hopefully.
Although there are truly tough decisions to be made, and intelligent conversations about complex issues are something that I think we can do more of in Public Square.
Hopefully. I think we're at the beginning of this situation, not the end, so we've got a lot more work to go to solve this problem.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We invite you to continue our discussion by joining an online chat on Thursday, June the 25th from 2 to 3 p.m. Dr. Pearson Cross, chairman of the Political Science Department at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and Barry Irwin, president of the Council for a Better Louisiana, will answer your questions live. Visit lpb.org/Public Square and click on the chat link. While you're there, take this month's survey and comment on tonight's show. You can also post a comment like Shayla Price did after last month's program about online social networks. Shayla writes, "Great show on social networking. It was very informative. I learned about different views on how individuals think and feel about social networking sites. Great job." Well, thanks for that comment, Shayla.
Please join us in July for an encore presentation of Louisiana's dropout problem, still a hot topic based on committee hearings and floor debates in this legislative session. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Good night, everyone.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org. Support for this program is provided by the men and women of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Through sustainable forestry, LFA members promote the health and productivity of Louisiana's forests for generations to come.